Welcome to the 76 Capital Leadership Series, and my name is Wayne Kimmel, and I'm your host as well as the managing partner of 76 Capital. And I am really, really excited about this show. And as you know, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series, we are all about interviewing the top entrepreneurs, the executives, the athletes who are truly doing the next thing in sports. And we're so excited to hear from them and how they're shaping all the different things they're doing across the industry. And today's guest is a special one. But before we get started, of course, check out, James Santor, our producer back at the station at James Santor. He's a great follow. You can follow all the things that happen at 76 Capital across all the social media networks. And of course, me at Wayne Kimmel across Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram as well. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple, as well as on YouTube, IGTV. You can catch everything as well. And we want to put out all these great stories so we can all figure out ways to help each other and make the sports industry something even greater than it is today. So let's get started. We have a great guest. We have Val Ackerman. She is the commissioner of the Big East. She has an incredible resume. We are so excited to have you on our show. So Val, welcome to our 76 Capital Leadership Series.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne. Great to be here. Look forward to chatting with you today.
We're super excited to have you because of all the things that you've done across the sports industry. You've broken barriers. You've started new leagues. I love how you talk about the NBA, the MNBA. I think that's awesome. I love when hearing you say those things. But before we get into all the great things that you did when you became a professional in sports, I'd love to hear your story, your backstory, where you grew up, and kind of what made you who you are today.
Yeah, sure, Wayne. Well, I'm a proud Jersey girl. For any of your listeners who are from the Garden State, I'm with you. I grew up in a small town outside of Trenton, New Jersey. And at a time when there weren't many opportunities for girls to play sports. And I was lucky because that was of interest to me. My dad was a high school athletics director and a basketball referee and himself a former athlete. So that was really my ticket to do the things I loved. We did a lot of backyard and basement stuff with the hoop in the driveway and the badminton net in the backyard. And we were members of a community pool. So I got to be on the swim team. I think that was my first foray when I was about 10 to be on a team. But it was really my dad and his dad before him, who was also in the high school sports space, that were great influences in terms of my interest in being in the sports business one day. And so, there I was in this small town and played sports in high school, played on the field hockey, basketball and teams and ran track, kept swimming in the summer. And then a real turning point for me was being able to go to college on an athletic scholarship. I was able to go to UVA, University of Virginia, great school, which at that time was in the early years of coeducation. And I was among the first female student athletes to get a grant and aid is what they called it. I got partial my first year. I was upgraded to a full ride my second year. And I will say that experience at UVA really helped make me what I am today. Just being at a school like that, having to juggle academics, athletics. Our basketball team wasn't very good, so we lost a lot of games early. But thanks to the efforts of my coach, Debbie Ryan, who built the program there, we got better every year. By the time I graduated, we got nationally ranked for a little bit of time. And when I graduated with my degree in political and social thought in 1981, I felt like I was really ready to kind of meet the challenges of adulthood. So sports has been a part of my life, Wayne, really, from the very early years. And now, as you mentioned, with my work at the Big East, it does feel full circle to have started out as a student athlete and now coming back in a commissioner role, helping make those opportunities available for other young people.
Well, it's an amazing, story. And, as you said, your dad was such a great influence and even grandfather, to you and kind of getting you to be a collegiate athlete. And, we were talking earlier before the show, right? I mean, the fact that you crossed over at UVA with Ralph Sampson, who's one of our athlete venture group members here at 76 Capital. That must have been special. I mean, you're the rise of the women's program, plus, then Ralph coming in. I mean, that must have been a special time down there in Charlottesville.
Well, I will say it was really cool to be part of that era of Virginia men's basketball. They were super good. They ended up in the Final Four, I think my fourth year, led by Ralph and Jeff Lamp and Lee Raker and others. Our women's team, in contrast, wasn't very strong. And so there was a gap between what we were doing, the stage of our program that we were at, and then the men's program very far along. But that said, we were great friends with the men's basketball team. Coach Terry Holland was really good to us in terms of when we could use the gym and those sorts of things. And Ralph turned out to be a great NBA player, as you know, a great friend. I have very fond memories of being around him and seeing what he did to energize Virginia. To have someone like that coming over the mountain from his hometown in Harrisonburg playing at UVA was a big, big deal. And so those sorts of friendships that you make in college, I'm sure your viewers feel the same way, are lifelong. I mean, there's just nothing about that experience that gets replicated later in life. Living with other people, practicing with them, going to class. I mean, your whole life revolves around this group of people. And that was certainly the case with my colleagues at the athletic department at UVA back in that time.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about relationships and how important that is to building those kinds of relationships. But those are the kind of things that matter so much in business across everything that we all do. And I know that, I'll maybe skip ahead for a second, but all the things that you've been able to do within your career, it's been interesting to watch from afar and hear your stories about how you've been able to develop relationships with the most senior level people in sports. And in some of those situations, those individuals gave you an amazing shot, right? A number of times they gave you a shot and you took it and you went for it and you were super successful in everything that you did.
Well, I would say to you, and I mean, your network is one of the biggest assets you can have. The web of people that the people that you admire, the people that admire you, the people you can lean on, look to, count on when you need a lift in the business or some advice. And I think that has been one of the most exciting components of my journey, which was, by the way, totally unplanned. Never expected to be sitting here today in the role I have. But this continuity, if you will, of friendships and relationships that I've had with people, really, in many cases, I knew back in the day at Virginia, who are still in my my address book, and I've got their email addresses and their cell phone numbers. So just having that group of colleagues kind of in your backdrop, I think is critically important in any business, and sports certainly no exception. I mean, it's a people business. Our trade really our commodity is the performances of other people. And the nature of the relationships that we develop with each other is very, very intense. And I have been lucky, as you said, because I have this varied network. I mean, I've worked in men's sports. That's kind of its own culture. I've worked in women's sports. It's different. I've worked in the pros, and they have their sort of way of doing things. The college community is unto itself. And then internationally, it's a whole nother deal entirely in terms of the concerns and the upbringings that people have had and the way they look at the world. So it has been very interesting to have all of that sort of crossing and melding. And, I often tell young people, take care of that network that you're beginning to develop, because that will come around and help you in ways you may not ever imagine somewhere further down in your career. And that's certainly been the case for me.
Well, that's great advice. And we're really happy to have Val Ackerman, the commissioner of the Big East, on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. And, Val, going back to after graduating at UVA, I understand you went on to play professionally in Europe and then off to law school, right? And then you became a lawyer. And how did you go from being a lawyer to ending up at the NBA? How did that work?
Well, Wayne, it was actually relationships that kind of got me to get that step. And I'll just, in broad strokes here, as you noted, I played overseas. There was no WNBA when I was coming out of Virginia. So for somebody like me that wanted to keep my career going a little bit longer, the only opportunity was overseas. And so I was able to get picked up by a club team in France. Great experience. Wish I had stayed longer, frankly, in Europe when I had that opportunity. But I came back to the U.S. after a season, went on to UCLA Law, had a chance to live in a different part of the country, which itself was a good experience. Um, and then didn't take long for me to figure out that I really needed and wanted to be back in sports and be practicing law in the sports world. So that was what I tried to do out of law school. I applied everywhere that I thought might want to hire a young lawyer. At a law school, I got a lot of rejection letters. Some of them I still have. And the advice that I got from my kitchen cabinet at that time was this: if you want to be a lawyer in sports, focus on the lawyer part right now. So get yourself the best legal experience, job experience you can. And so for me, that became working at a big law firm. I joined the firm of Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett in New York City right out of law school. I was one of a large class of associates that they brought in every year. I started out in the corporate department. I did some banking work. And then sort of life got in the way. I met my husband-to-be, Charlie, at the firm. He was practicing tax. When we decided to get married, I left the firm. He stayed. And interestingly, I had made a contact through Simpson Thacher with another young lawyer who had worked for my husband, who was able to go in-house at the NBA. So his name was Bill. Bill and I became friendly. He knew that my dream job was to work at the NBA. So when I left Simpson, some months later, Bill reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you still working at the NBA, interested in working at the NBA? There's a job opening up here for a junior lawyer." And so I said, "Of course, that would be great." Long story short, I interviewed for it. I got the job. And then that was the launch pad for my now 32-year career in sports. But interestingly enough, it was Bill having been at my firm, working for my husband, my having met him, and then hearing from him later on that there was an opportunity that my background might be suited for, that got my foot in the door and eventually got me the job. So another, story there, Wayne, about the importance of relationships and networking, whatever field it is that you choose to be in.
Again, tremendous advice. And you just, I tell young people all the time, you just never know. Like, you just really never know that, who and who you know right now. And stay in touch with people, because you may be able to help each other, and most importantly, that's what it's all about in this world. What we believe at 76 Capital is all about trying to make this world a better place and helping others. So it's amazing to hear that. And so you're at the NBA, you're a lawyer there. I'd love to hear maybe the first time you ever got to meet David Stern, the commissioner.
Well, it was before I started working there, because he was the last stop on my interview sequence when I got the job. The hiring manager was the then general counsel at the NBA, Gary Bettman, whose name will be known to many viewers, now the longtime commissioner of the National Hockey League. Gary at that time was the general counsel for the NBA. So it was his opening that I was applying for. So when I went for my interview with the NBA, I met with Gary. I met with another lawyer on his staff, Joel Litvin, who was there for many years. I met with Russ Granick, the longtime deputy commissioner, himself a lawyer. And then the last stop, as I said, was with David. And it was very nerve-wracking to go in. This is now my fourth interview at the league. David had a reputation for being, super smart, and I didn't know what to expect. And Joel, who I had interviewed with the week before, said, I was waiting in the waiting room at the NBA in the reception area, about to visit with David. And Joel happened to be walking through, and he said, "Are you here to see David?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "He's going to ask you about your law review article." And I said to him, "Well, I wasn't on law review," but I said, "I was on moot court. I was on my moot court national team at UCLA Law." He said, "So few minutes later, David's assistant came out, brought me back into his office. I walked in, and sure enough, within a minute, he started asking me about my moot court brief. And so had Joel not given me the heads up, and had I not had that 3 or 4 minutes to try to remember what that case was all about, I might have flubbed it. But I owe it to Joel for giving me the tip there. But that's what it was like. I mean, David was brilliant, just a tremendous leader. He made the NBA what it is today. Took it from being a small sports league. When I joined the league, I was employee 98. And now, as best I can tell, it's, 10 times that in terms of the head count. He was a lawyer himself, and so he was very inquisitive, tremendously curious intellectually, wanted to know everything about everything, had a good feel for decision making. He wanted to know all the facts, but at the end of the day, he would always cite his decision making style as informed impulsiveness. At some point, you know what you have to know, and then you go. So that was one of sort of many mantras that we sort of had handed down to us working there. I was at the league for 16 years, first on the MNBA side, and then, of course, on the WNBA side. And it was just truly an honor to work there, to be part of David's orbit. And when we lost him last year, it was frankly one of the darkest days that one can imagine in the basketball world.
Yeah, it was just so sad. I think I've shared with you, I obviously didn't have the long-term relationship that you had with him, but he was just so impactful. And I had the opportunity to interview him in November of 2019 at our Sports Innovation Conference. And, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And his advice was phenomenal. It was exciting, to hear all the things that he was going to go do, plus, what he was going to do over the Christmas holidays. He was sharing where he was going, and it was just so sad to hear what happened. And I said to you, I heard you. You were one of the speakers at his memorial. You were part of his world all of those years, and I think it's amazing what he did for all of us. What are there any other some David? Everyone had kind of I guess their Davidism or whatever you want to call it, but are there any really great stories that you can share with us? Maybe some funny tidbits of things, maybe a travel story or something that you did with him that was really special.
Well, there's many, I'm sure. One that I always think about, because this speaks to David's micromanaging tendencies. In fact, it's probably a little known fact, when he left the NBA after his 30-year career and retired and got into the technology space, as you know, Wayne, in a much deeper way, he started to collect a portfolio of companies where he had either equity interests or he was on the advisory board. And the name of this portfolio was Micromanagement Ventures or something. The first word was micromanagement.
That's right.
All of us who knew him smiled, because that was David. I mean, he was sort of in the weeds in ways that a CEO shouldn't be, but he understood that the details matter. And so that was another sort of mantra handed down to us all the time, was that micromanagement was underrated. And I remember things like being in, at the All-Star game, and we would have these large parties and they'd have buffet lines. That's how you got your food. And he would get upset if people were standing in line too long on the buffet line. He would be looking for the head of the events department to find out why we didn't have another couple of tables set up with food. Why are all these guests of the league having to wait, holding their plates for 3 minutes instead of having to sort of breeze through the line? So that was the kind of guy he was. He was big picture guy. He was an in the weeds guy. He, as I said before, I think was a good decision maker. And, he was a sales guy at heart and was always in selling mode. And that's why I think, the WNBA came to be, because he really, he was really the one that got the NBA owners at that time to buy in to this idea that women are such an important part of the future of basketball. Okay. They're our fans. They're the family members of our players. But they play the game, and they need to help us lead the sport into our next phase of growth. And so it was David who went to NBA owners and said, "Look, we got to do this, and here's how we're going to do it." And I was fortunately sort of right there with a women's basketball background, and I had worked for David myself. I was his first chief of staff beginning in 1990, and so we sort of knew each other well. And it was his vision and his leadership, behind the idea that the NBA would somehow be able to support women's basketball in a major league way. And it happened. And women's basketball really owes him an enormous debt of gratitude. I'm very glad that this summer he will be inducted into the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. Many of us wanted that for a long time. He always resisted. His family consented to it. So very, very fitting that women's basketball will be able to give him the thanks that he's due.
That's incredible to hear. And I'll tell you, I would always wanting to ask you this question about, I mean, you basically you were given the keys, I guess, to go start the WNBA. I mean, what do you do first, right? How do you go about that? I mean, it's one of the most probably high profile startups ever, and you have, you're going to be playing in these big arenas, and you had, superstar, female players who are coming up the ranks who are going to be playing in the league, and it was going to be everything was literally, it was everything like the NBA, but now it was going to be the WNBA, and you had to go live, and it was all, I wouldn't say it was all, but I guess maybe it was all on your shoulders, right? That must have been incredible and exciting.
Well, it was exhilarating and exhausting, all at the same time. It's a stretch, Wayne, to say it was all on my shoulders. And in fact, that was the beauty of the launch. I mean, thanks to David and Russ Granick, most of all, Adam Silver, so many other of basketball's best and brightest. Rick Welts, my dear friend, we're all involved in this. And the fact is, the whole company ended up being behind it heading into the launch. It was the priority project in the office, if you will, at a time when the NBA's business was really good. We'd had a couple of dream teams under our belt. The league was humming. Women's college basketball was cresting, thanks to the efforts of Coach Oriema at UConn, the successes there, the interest ESPN was taking in the women's game. And then, of course, we had the Atlanta Olympics, which were in our own backyard, on our own soil in the summer of '96. USA winning the gold medal. The NBA was quietly behind the marketing and the promotion of that national team that went on to bring home gold in Atlanta. So we had the combination of NBA capabilities, good timing, really good timing. And with that because of sort of where the NBA was and where the economy was, and then with the benefit of the national team effort and the testing of the waters, that team, which traveled between 95 and 96 in a run-up to Atlanta, we were able to get a sense of the potential interest in women's basketball at the elite level. We actually had it sort of, stars lined up in ways that had never happened before in women's basketball. So while the launch was an incredible amount of work and, tireless efforts on behalf of many of us, I think we had a really good plan with the NBA behind it. We were playing in the summer months, which freed up television in an important way. And in such an effective way, the WNBA continues to play in the summer, in part because of the multiplicity of television windows during that time of year. And now what you see with the league about to celebrate its 25th anniversary is this generation of growth. The players, we had great players in our day, but now there's more of them. The game is at a high level. And I think last summer, especially, the league really established for itself a powerful identity with the support the players especially put into racial justice and social justice. And I think that has reinforced what I always thought, which was that women's basketball could be a beacon here for other women's team sports especially. And so some good things are starting to happen, have been happening, and now starting to pick up in a really significant way. So hard to believe it was 25 years ago, but again, David Stern gets the credit on this.
Well, it's really great to hear these stories. And again, Val, having you on our 76 Capital Leadership Series is a real honor, and super to have you here. And now as the commissioner of the Big East, I mean, a Jersey girl, as you said earlier. Now you're the commissioner of the Big East. I kind of think about back the early days of the Big East with Dave Gavitt and those unbelievable games between Georgetown and St. John's and Villanova and Syracuse. I mean, it's like, and now not everyone kind of, Syracuse now moved off to the ACC, but I mean, it's just really fascinating to see what has happened. You mentioned, Gino Auriemma from on the UConn side, from the women's side of the game. I mean, it's really incredible to have all of those exciting pieces in a basketball conference, which is, you've built it to be even more than that now. Originally, just as a basketball conference, must be exciting and challenging, I guess, at the same time, to be the commissioner of the Big East.
Well, Wayne, yes, that's a great way to sum it up. Again, a role I never expected at all. But you mentioned Dave Gavitt, and that, frankly, was one of the attractions of the position to me, because I knew Dave quite well when I started out at the NBA, and I started out with Gary Bettman in the legal department. I quickly came to work as well for Russ Granick, who I mentioned, the Hall of Fame, well-respected, longtime deputy commissioner. And one of the things that Russ and I were assigned by David to work on was the NBA's fledgling relationship with USA Basketball. And that led to the appearance of the first Dream Team in the 1992 Olympics. So, the launch of the WNBA and being able to work on Dream Team 92 were like sometimes hard to, pick which one was more exciting, because they both were, and both very impactful events in the story of the game of basketball in our country and globally. But Dave, at that time, was the president of USA Basketball, had founded the Big East in 1979. While Russ and I and others were working with Dave on the first and second Dream Teams, Dave left to become the head of basketball for the Celtics. So he sort of flipped allegiances from college to pro. So I knew Dave. He was himself a tremendous leader, really just a consummate politician. He really just knew how to develop consensus. He had a great manner, cared deeply about the game of basketball as a former coach. And Dave is deeply missed as well in the basketball world. So having known Dave and what he was doing with this basketball-centric vision, that was a contributing factor for me when the opportunity presented itself to me 8 years ago to lead basically the new Big East, which sort of came out of the, I don't know if ashes is the word, but was one of the outcomes of intense realignment in the college sports world over the last 10, 15, 8 years ago, with the old Big East in effect crumbling, many schools leaving, principally to the ACC, to pursue their football dreams. And that left behind schools that included 7 of my current schools, known as the Catholic 7, who in some cases were charter members of the original Big East. They were basketball, they played a bunch of sports, not really football. They were basketball oriented. And when all these schools were leaving, they kind of said to themselves, we've got to take our destiny into our own hands, led by President Jack DeGioia from Georgetown, Father Peter Donahue from Villanova, Father Brian Shanley, then at Providence, now at St. John's, and others led this exodus out to form the new Big East. And it sort of was great timing, because at that time, Fox Sports was looking for programming for its soon-to-be launched national cable channel, FS1, which it was hoping would compete eventually with ESPN, and it has, and more. The presidents were able to secure the right to keep playing the men's basketball tournament at Madison Square Garden, the home of the Big East tournament now for, I think, 39 years and counting. We have a great relationship with the building, Joel Fisher and his staff. And they brought in Butler, Creighton, and Xavier, 3 basketball schools who had proud histories in their own right. And so this sort of new 10 team configuration came together, 10 school configuration. And then when all that was sort of dealt with and the lawyers had gotten out of the way, then they needed somebody to run it, and that became me, long story short. So it was an extraordinary opportunity for me to be with a basketball-centric league. I knew Dave. The presidents wanted to be in New York City. The old Big East had been based in Providence. They wanted to move to New York, which was fine by me because that's where I live. And I really shared their vision that a basketball-centric conference could be successful in a football world. And that's been borne out by certainly our men's basketball successes over the last 8 years, led by Villanova, 2 national titles. Those are up there for me too. Watching Villanova win, from courtside national championships in 16 and 18 were absolutely thrilling. And I tip my hat to Coach Jay Wright for just the outstanding effort that he's going to be in the Hall of Fame someday and deserves it. And now we've got UConn back. That was the announcement of last year that UConn, a charter member of the Big East, was coming back and joining us as an 11th school. So while it's been a tough year because of COVID, not the kind of reentry year we would have, liked, it's still amazing to have UConn back in the Big East. I know they're going to pick up and do great things in men's basketball. And then on the women's basketball side, what more needs to be said about this greatest of all time program and Coach Oriana, Emma. So exciting times for the Big East. Lots of uncertainty in college sports right now, but it's a great group of schools, and I'm very proud to be helping lead the way into their future.
And Val, you've also done really innovative things at the Big East as well. I mean, and one of the things I always say to my partner Chad Stender was he got lucky. A couple of years ago, as it was about 3 years ago, Vince Nicastro called and said, "Hey, I'd like you to be part of this business plan competition thing." And I said, "Oh man, it was." And I think we had a family event that day, and Chad was like, "I'll do it for Vince, no problem." And he's been one of the judges of your business plan competition that you do in conjunction with the Big East tournament, which I think is really smart. How did you come up with those types of things? Plus the fact that what you're doing around esports and how do you think about kind of the next thing when you're running a very, very successful conference, as you said, I mean, with the champions, with Villanova, et cetera. I mean, like, that's enough in itself, but how do you start thinking about the next thing?
Well, Wayne, I'll start two pieces of this. One is I'm going to give a little credit back to David again on this one, at least in terms of how he shaped my thinking about wanting to be more than just a sports league. That was a big thing with David. He wanted to be more than just a sports league. And the NBA is, as we all know. I mean, and David led the way in terms of broadening the league's reach and international, building on the back of the dream team, as I mentioned. Technology, he was a savant, and you know this from the work he did subsequent to the NBA, but all that was going on while he was there. And then this openness about the role of women in the future of the game of basketball, and so much more. Community service, the list went on and on and on. Building the first team marketing and business operations staff in pro sports came from the NBA. So he was an innovator, and he was, entrepreneurial in his way of thinking, and he wanted to do more than just sports. And so I will say that's kind of the mindset that I brought to the Big East. I mean, I knew the core job is, we have 22 sports. We have our function in the ecosystem in terms of what we do for our schools and the services we offer. I knew that we would be constructive. I wanted us to be constructive participants within the NCAA membership, and we have been, and I've served on a number of NCAA committees to that end. But it just seemed like our schools were and basketball, of course, and other sports, we've had our successes. But it just seemed to me that with this core group of schools who were so common, and by that I mean like-minded, about their missions, their values, their academic strengths, and so on, there was potential to do more and come together in ways outside of the athletics achievement side. And so that's kind of, once we got up and running again, once we put the Big East back together again in 2013 and rebuilt our staff and found a new office and all that, that was really what our attention turned to. So part one was David and his mindset as it affected me. Part two was we got the input from our schools. We formed we did a strategic plan. We formed a committee. We had 2 committees. One was on business initiatives, ways where we thought we could maybe come together to think of some ideas where, frankly, hopefully, long-term, we could make some extra revenue. And that led to our esports initiative. Not quite there yet on the revenue side of that, but it has been exciting to be in the esports space and tremendous interest among current students in that endeavor, and for them to now be able to represent their schools in a competitive kind of way and be part of the Big East has been, we think, tremendous for them, something they're very proud of. And our presidents have supported this 100%. And then the other working group we put together, we called the Academic Collaborations Working Group. And that was the one that came up with the idea you mentioned, which was this startup challenge, where we have groups of students from all of our schools presenting their entrepreneurial ideas to a group of judges. And then, having a winner, declaring a winner. So we have sort of on these two tracks, forums for our schools to weigh in on ways that we can, again, do more than just be a sports league. And so whether it's esports, whether it's a startup competition, we've had admissions fairs, we have an annual mental health / student athlete well-being forum that's widely anticipated within our league. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that's very strong. We have a separate working group that's helping us think out the components of that plan. That's very important to our league. We have done student athlete development programs in basketball and other sports. So we really have tried to do a lot with a little. But again, why not? We can do all those things. We know our schools are up for it. And the good news is I think we are, helping to make a difference in the educational experiences of not only our athletes, but the other students at Big East schools.
Well, I think it's really, really interesting that you're doing this. I think it's something that's it's very smart. I think it enables you to really build the overall brand and everything that you're doing around the Big East. And I'm happy that Chad has an opportunity to do it with you over these years. He's enjoyed it, being part of the business plan competition part of it. And when I think about all the things that you've done in your career so far, and I know I'm sure you got a lot more. You have a lot more to do that you're going to go do. Is there sort of one moment or memory? I mean, you talked about the dream team. You talked about starting the WNBA. Could you pinpoint one thing at this point that maybe it was the one thing that kind of just you were like, wow, I think I'm here now. I can, or is there something that is there a moment that you can kind of think about that you're most proud of at this point?
It's a hard one, because there are a few I have to say there, and it just they kind of flood my brain when I think about them. I do feel lucky that I've been able to experience so many high profile and transformative events in the game of basketball. And I guess I would say to you, I would put on the list, if you'll allow, the gold medal game at Barcelona when Team USA, after all that, brought home the gold, and we had that amazing team up on the medal stand. The first WNBA game now 25 years ago. I was there with my colleague Rick Welts, and many stories around that game and the pent-up enthusiasm that we saw among the fans. I remember a few days later, being at the first New York Liberty home game at Madison Square Garden with David. He didn't make the trip to LA with Rick and me, but he came to the Liberty opener, and he was in amazement, because we filled the building, and it was just a different electricity in the air than you would experience at, say, a Knick game. And that was very validating. And then, as I said, I've been, the Big East moments, whether it was Villanova's national titles in men's basketball in 16 and 18, Georgetown won the national championship in men's soccer in December of 2019. And I was there with President DeJoy, and that was incredible. They actually played my alma mater, the University of Virginia, in the national title games. That was a little weird.
Wow.
But, being able to that's the beauty of being in sports. I mean, it's a live event business. You have to, but like to travel to all these great events. And so I've been, those are at the top of the list. But I think the sense of satisfaction that comes from feeling like, we've made fans happy. In the case of pro sports, we've done a service for our student athletes, particularly our female student athletes in the college space. And then because of my work globally, just seeing how much sports brings the world together. It really is like no other sort of institution in its ability to build bridges, affect positive social change, and make the world flat. I mean, the world's a better place because we have athletes competing against each other in constructive and healthy and positive ways. So to have been a part of all of those things in some way has really been a great experience for me.
Well, Val, as we start to wrap things up here on our 76 Capital Leadership Series, and this has been a great conversation. Again, appreciate you taking the time coming on our show. You are a leader, no doubt. Whether people say she's a female leader, she's a leader, you are a leader, period, right? End of sentence. So what does it really mean to you? When someone says, what is leadership all about? What are some of the things and traits and qualities that you think are important that a leader needs to have to be successful?
I would say when there's many. In fact, I taught a few classes on this along the way, and there's really a varied skill set here. But I think a lot of it has to do with the inspirational component of leadership. I mean, just being able to, one, inspire yourself, because being a leader is very hard work, especially the last year. It's just been, dealing with COVID in the sports world. Dealing with COVID, period, has been brutal. But just in our sector, it's been a grind, trying to find our way through this without a playbook. So you just, like, every day, you have to sort of give yourself the pep talk about, we're going to figure this out. We have to be optimistic for our staffs. We have to look up to people in our business that are helping us all figure out the path forward here. So inspiring self, and then having the ability to bring others along, I think, is what leadership is really all about. And I keep coming back to David, but he was, and him, he was about as inspirational as they come. He just had a way of explaining it, persuading you. Sometimes he was a little tougher than persuasion because he was the boss and he hit hard sometimes. But I think about that a lot, is, how to sell it. You're selling, how to persuade others to come along, and, and hoping that your vision is sound and that others subscribe to it. And then, keeping the best interests of your stakeholders in mind, and hopefully allowing what you're doing to pay off so that the dividends are theirs. So I'd say that would probably be at the top of my list, inspiring.
Well, you've inspired me. I could have this conversation with you for hours. I know you have a lot to do. We all do. The David stories certainly bring a smile to my face. And I hope it does for all of our viewers and listeners out there. I mean, what an incredible man, did incredible things. As you said, made this world a better place. And that's what it's all about. So again, we're so excited to have had you as our guest on our 76 Capital Leadership Series. Make sure you follow and check out all the things that Val Ackerman's doing as commissioner of the Big East across all different areas. And she's going to continue to do more innovative things. And then, of course, if you're an entrepreneur, an athlete, a student, a business person who wants to work in the sports industry or wants to create a business in the sports betting industry, in the esports industry, in the sports tech industry, or just in want to do something innovative in sports, reach out to us at 76 Capital. We'd love to talk with you and see if there are ways that we can help you achieve your dream. And as we all say at 76 Capital, try to make the impossible possible. So once again, I'm Wayne Kimmel. Thanks so much for tuning into this edition of our 76 Capital Leadership Series. Val, it was awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much.